Hey, Composer Gloves here, and today we're going to be answering the questions, what is dynamic processing, and the other question, what are its tools? So let's get into this. I'm wearing a hat. First, let's address what dynamic range is. Dynamic range in a sound is the range of loudness you have. So you can have, that sounds a little weird to say it because it's actually the softest you can get and the loudest you can get. And in a piece, if it has great dynamic range, such as a classical symphony, they will generally have spots that are very soft, and then they'll have other spots that are very loud. Actually, more of a romantic symphony. Like romanticism is all about this like loud, soft deal. Listen to some Beethoven. So, okay, so there's that. Nowadays we have stuff that's really loud a lot of the time. Like on average, things are constantly being very loud, and we understand that makes things be perceived really loud because that's the way our ears sort of are. But we need something to compare it against. So a track that has a little bit of silence before the big enormous hit, it will by comparison be way louder. It's a technique people use. So they'll thin out their stuff so that when their loud part hits, it sounds louder by comparison. So they create additional punch, and it gets a little dicey, but dynamic processing alters this thing, and it messes with our transients, it messes with the frequency content, it changes a whole lot of stuff. It's a complicated piece of the puzzle, but it's one that is fundamental to mixing. Like, it's just everywhere. And if you were doing like classical work, big dynamic range is something you want, but because it's classical, like that's a thing classical music does. But if you were doing like EDM, you're going to want to really control your dynamic range in a way that is relatively loud pretty much all the time, but occasionally we'll have moments that are softer. And for example, something you would do to a singer that's singing like on maybe a modern rock pop tune, they'd be, if they're singing and they're singing like this, and then all of a sudden they move away from the microphone, or they sing softer or whatever, then you're going to have this like soft word and then this loud word, and then maybe the soft word will get masked into the mix while the loud word comes right on through, and we have these issues. So we're going to treat the singer's dynamic range. We're going to reduce the dynamic range so that it is loud more of the time, allowing the singer to be heard on top of the mix. So there's all these different things. So that's dynamic range. Another thing in musicians speak, if you play an instrument, you'll have seen these. They have these what are called dynamic markers. So you will have things that will literally be like a little P, and it stands for piano, meaning play soft. That's actually what the piano forte was. What was so cool about the piano was you could play soft and loud on like the same instrument. That was pretty cool. So we have this soft, and you actually, if you put more P's, that means play softer, and there's actually names for those. I'm not going to toss you all these names though. Then you have medium soft, then you have loud. Well, we have medium loud. So you have soft, medium loud. Then you have loud, which is forte. Then you have fortissimo, and then you add, so at this point you have a little MF, and then you have F for forte, and then you have like a whole bunch of Fs, and you just add them to make it sound louder. Sometimes composers get ridiculous and they put like a whole bunch of Fs to basically say, hey, I don't care, whatever your limit is, hit that limit. That's like what they're trying to say. And it just got like dark in this room. The sun, cloud, something. Okay, so what are its tools though, because we're talking about all this stuff. Let's go ahead and discover some of its tools. And I put them on one of these tracks. Here we go. So our first tool is a compressor. Now, I don't know why I'm opening this up as my first one. This is a complicated compressor, but we have something called compression, and we're looking at a single band of compression right now. You can split a signal into frequency ranges and compress them individually. This is called multi-band compression. What it does is you turn down the volume with compression, and then you turn up the overall volume at the end. So things that are, and you turn down the volume only when it exceeds a threshold. So imagine you're on a fader, right? And you're moving this fader up and down. When the singer sings a loud part and you know it's going to be coming, you're going to turn the fader down just a bit, just for that one spot, so it's not as loud. So you're reducing the dynamic range, right? Because it got louder, so you're going to turn it down. And then when she sings soft again, you're gonna turn it back up. You're going to release it. You're going to bring it back to where it was. And so you're only turning it down at the loud parts and letting the softer parts go through. That's essentially what a compressor does. And there's a whole bunch of different methods. It gets to be a little bit of a complicated thing, but it's really straightforward in other ways. Like, it's essentially just an automatic volume knob. So you reduce the dynamic range overall, and then you turn it up at the end. It's called compression. This can mean a number of things for our mix. It can do things to transients. So we want to be careful about this, but that's our first tool. It's called compression. And again, you can have multi-band compression, which is you're looking at different bands of frequencies, and then you're reacting individually. So it's as if you had a separate guy who is only in charge of the low frequencies, a separate guy for the mid ones, separate guy for the high ones. And they also have a thing called a dynamic equalizer, which is the same deal, only instead of looking at it as in bands. So here we've got low, mid, high bands. We've got a one equalizer, and we've got different bands like this, but we can set them to do things very differently. And we see we have a threshold. That's essentially like at what point, how loud does it have to be for you to turn down the volume? Now on the flip side of the coin, we have what's called expansion. And there's expansion, which is sort of the same thing as upwards compression. The differences are kind of slim, but let's talk about what expansion is. So expansion is the exact opposite. Instead, when the signal goes below the threshold, you're going to turn up the signal. And so, it's getting softer, so we're going to turn it up. You're going to turn it up by a set amount, because if you turned it up for like forever, then that's bad. You're going to get feedback. So upwards expansion. I have the opposite of upwards expansion, not compression, but if you could also have downwards expansion. What does that mean? Well, when the signal goes below the threshold, so it passes the points at like which you're going to move the volume knob, and they're getting softer, downward expansion actually makes it so that they get softer faster. So, they're singing softer, and so you actually make them get softer faster. So you're affecting when they sing softer, you say, they're like, let's say I'm going, like getting softer. I don't know why I'm associating it with the pitch bend. And this one, as I sing softer, it'll be like I get softer a lot faster that case. Like it goes to silence a lot quicker. You also have something called a gate. A gate can work gates are pretty self-explanatory. When they pass the threshold, it does something like pretty specific. Like it says, it's gone below the threshold, turn the sound off completely. Like immediately, boom, it gates it. It turns it off because it's gone below the threshold. No more sound comes through. It mutes the signal. Or you can have it where it passes the threshold and now bang, it lets signal through. It's gone through the gate. All the signal is now let through, where before no signal was let through. So that's a gate. So you use gates to affect, maybe you've got some annoying background noise, and some people have gotten very sophisticated with the way they build these things, but the general ideas are pretty simple. So we've got a compressor, turns down the volume occasionally, and then you can then turn up the overall volume. You have an expander where, it's gotten an expander where it goes past the threshold, and as it gets louder faster. So instead of when I'm singing like this, let's say I'm singing and I get a little bit louder. Well, if I were to do that again, I'm singing and I'm getting a little bit louder. Like it gets louder faster, like it aids it. And we have the opposite of that. When I'm getting softer, I get softer faster, and that is a downward expander. Then we have this thing called a gate, and that's what turns. So once I pass the threshold, I'm immediately let through. All of it can go through, versus under the threshold, I am not let. If I go below the threshold, everything's stopped. You can picture this as sort of a water pipe that's got water in it, and the pipe has to be totally full for the gate to open and let the water through. But if the pipe is only like halfway full, it shuts off. The second it becomes not full, it shuts down. It says no water goes through. You can think of a gate sort of like that. And again, we can get sort of complicated, because why not have a multi-band gate where it only gates like high frequencies and lets the low ones through. So, or the what do you call that? The mid-range and the lows through. Okay, so then there's one more. There's actually, you can get into weird subcategories of stuff. Those are the general ideas. This is so common, though, that it would be weird to not talk about it. It is a limiter. And you see this limiter actually has a noise gate, but you can also think of this, you have a threshold, and you also have a release value. So you can also use this sort of as a downward expander as well. But we have here a fruity limiter. And this thing, if we don't have it off, if we turn it on, we can see here that we have this line. This line is our threshold, and we can actually set a ceiling. So stuff cannot go past the ceiling, right? So this is our threshold. When volume reaches this point, it can't get past this point. It just can't do it. It reaches a roof. And what's happening here is it's basically a really crazy compressor. It looks at it, and you turn that sucker down. Let's say that you've told the singer you can never sing above -6 decibels. And they try to do it. And every time they try to do it, you, without any problem, turn them down the exact amount you need to get them just below 6 decibels. Like no matter what they do, they cannot sing above that. And then the singer, I don't know, maybe gets pissed off at you, or maybe she does, and throws, her chair at your window or whatever in the control room. But anyways, that's what a limiter is, basically just a crazy compressor where it will always turn it down just enough. And now you might be saying, in digital land, this is pretty simple, but And analog lamps a little complicated because you got to hear them go above it for you to go like, oh, they went above the threshold. I better turn them down. So we have this thing called a look ahead limiter, which is able to, it puts a delay on your signal so it can look ahead. And so it delays your signal, looks ahead, says, hey, we've got a peak coming that's breaking the rule. And then you can turn down the volume before the peak gets there. That's a look ahead limiter. These things are largely responsible for the loudness war. They're the reason why this thing got sort of started. So yeah, when you were able to look ahead and then turn stuff down so that your average could literally just, you could push the whole thing right up to the ceiling, that's when we started getting very, very loud. Because now we're loud all the time and we can do it rather well. We don't ever have to worry about something breaking through. So those are the big ones. So we have compressors, gates, expanders, downwards and upwards. And that's pretty much it. Now I showed you a dynamic EQ. And this is great and all, but it's basically a multi-band compressor. So it's just compression. And any tool that touches dynamic range can do this. Now there are various ways they do their job, meaning, you know, they can employ different filters. They can employ different methods of detection. They might turn some they have like magic settings that like change depending on the signal, whereas they're non-linear. So maybe they respond a bit differently just at random to make it more organic feeling, like small differences. Some are really into modeling physical, actual real life compressors, and others are like Maximus that I don't believe has any sort of basis. They were just trying to make something that's extraordinarily flexible and lets you do some cool things. And we also have upwards compression. We'll talk about all this stuff later on in future videos. If you have any questions about this, let me know. Again, I mean, there'll be future videos that will answer some of your questions. But hopefully this was a useful introduction. If you've never really seen, if you didn't know what dynamic processing was, and also like just some of the basic tools you have at your disposal. So when you see really fancy compressors that are doing their things, now there are various things that when you pay more money, they may employ like various types of, obviously the filters may be of a different design, maybe a little bit more complicated to implement, give you more options, more control over things. Maybe one has oversampling while the other one doesn't, stuff like that. So if you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.